Hi, it's Knuckle. Today let's read poem number 359 by Emily Dickinson, A Bird Came Down the Walk. It's short, so we'll read through the whole poem first, and then take a look at what it might mean. This poem could mean so many things, so these are just my impressions, but I'd love to hear your interpretations too. A Bird Came Down the Walk, number 359, by Emily Dickinson. A bird came down the walk, he did not know I saw. He bit an angleworm in halves, and ate the fellow raw. And then he drank a dew from a convenient grass, and then hopped sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. He glanced with rapid eyes, they hurried all abroad. They looked like frightened Petes, I thought. He stirred his velvet head. Like one in danger cautious, I offered him a crumb, and he unrolled his feathers and rode him softer home. Then oars divide the ocean, 2 silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks of noon leap plashless as they swim.
So, A Bird Came Down the Walk by Emily Dickinson. A bird came down the walk, he did not know I saw. He bit an angleworm in halves, and ate the fellow raw. Yikes, so I have a lot of thoughts about this beginning, especially eating the fellow raw, which we'll talk about in a minute. I think it can get so easy for a poem as well-rhymed as this one to get lost in the music of it and not even realize what it's actually saying. You'll notice that the different animals here are capitalized. So bird and angleworm. And even though it's a bird, so it's a common noun, not a proper noun, like big bird, for instance, we're still capitalizing bird here, and same thing with angleworm. And I think it humanizes these figures a bit. It almost makes them into characters rather than objects. They're figures in our mind. Bird and worm are common words in poetry, and if not capitalized, they would be mere words. But here they're not just words, they're characters in a scene. The scene opens with a bird coming down the walk, not knowing he's being seen, right? He did not know I saw. The speaker uses he to describe the bird, gendering it and humanizing it again. So this bird may represent more than just a bird. He did not know I saw. Why does this matter? I have a number of thoughts. At its simplest, this piece of information is telling us that the bird is not just performing, since he's unaware of its observer. The bird is having a meal, and usually when you do this, you're least conscious of your surroundings. Notice this about yourself when you eat. It's hard to be aware of your surroundings when you're eating. But also our most human, basic, and biological needs are those about which we tend to be most private. So that might also be why it's important to know that he did not know I saw. There's also, as we get to the next 2 lines here, the idea that what the bird might be doing may be suspicious or even dark. He bit the angleworm in halves and ate the fellow raw. So it's not just the bird ate the worm, as happens normally in nature. We actually hear about how he cut up this worm, and then he ate the fellow raw. So we're humanizing the worm again, right? He didn't eat a worm, he kills the fellow, which is a word usually reserved for humans. Fellow is also interesting because it could also imply a sense of brotherhood. To kill a fellow is a very different thing from killing something below you on the food chain, as a worm is to a bird. He ate the fellow raw too as well. Of course birds eat worms raw. They don't eat cooked worms. If I saw a bird eating a worm, I wouldn't say, oh, he's eating it raw. So again, we're kind of humanizing the bird here. The bird and the worm here are more than they seem. They're characters, they're not just objects. And then he drank a dew from a convenient grass, and then hopped sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. Again, there's some sense that this bird represents more than a bird. He hopped sideways to let the beetle pass. So there's some intentionality there behind the bird's actions, whereas we usually think of animals as being more instinctive than intentional. It's also worth mentioning you've got and then twice here. So the sequencing kind of matters. First, the bird eats the worm raw and then lets the beetle pass. There's also something interesting about the way that's written. To let a beetle pass, as opposed to eating it the way he ate the worm. There's a clear juxtaposition in the way the bird treats the worm versus the beetle. It might symbolize the choices we make in everyday life. We may have an intention in our lives to be courteous, generous, selfless, to hop sideways, to let a beetle pass. But there are things we may have to do for survival that may come at the expense of others, as with the bird eating the worm. It might be a juxtaposition between the kind of life we try to live and the reality of what lies behind that facade. In humanizing the bird, maybe Dickinson is actually showing us the animalism of man. Behind our intentions of nobility, there's some element of irreducible rascality within us. He glanced with rapid eyes that hurried all abroad. They looked like frightened beads, I thought. He stirred his velvet head. So even before reading about the frightened beads, I could already tell this implied fear. These first two lines here implied fear, right? To glance with rapid eyes that hurried all abroad. Hurry doesn't mean to just do something quickly. It means to do something hastily and maybe even anxiously. We're unsure of what this bird is actually fearful of right now. It might be a deeper anxiety, the kind that humans might experience. Or it might be the reverse, right? Maybe Dickinson is showing us how, like birds and other animals, we too as humans are constantly in survival and self-protective mode. Like one in danger cautious, I offered him a crumb, and he unrolled his feathers and rode him softer home. So now the speaker of the poem is actually entering the scene. Until now, the speaker's been a sideline observer. And in entering the scene, the speaker is becoming a character too. In the previous stanza, the bird was described as frightened, and now the speaker is cautious, as one in danger might be. So that blurring of the line again of what makes a human versus an animal. But the fear being described here is one that I think a lot of us have experienced. There's always that fear when man encounters the natural world or an animal, even something as innocuous as a bird. Here you have a human entering the world of bird, worm, and beetle. And bird, worm, and beetle themselves seem to have something of a human relationship with each other, as we just went over. I also like this slant rhyme from crumb to home. Slant rhyme can mean a lot of things, but to me, slant rhyme can sometimes feel a bit unsatisfactory, like something is missing. In this case, the speaker offered the bird a crumb, but he flew away rather than accept it. It's also interesting that this bird is flying home. Where is home? Do birds have homes? I suppose mothering birds have nests, but this bird is male. Again, there's a sense that this bird represents more than just a bird. Then oars divide the ocean, too silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks of noon leap passionless as they swim. It's beautiful imagery to imagine the wings of a bird dividing the sky like oars divide an ocean, right? So if we just go back to the last line before this one, so the bird was unrolling his feathers and rowing himself softer home. And then oars divide the ocean. So you're imagining the wings of a bird dividing the sky like oars divide an ocean. I also love butterflies swimming in the banks of noon. So it reminds me of the old story of the fish that asks what water is, right? Fish are totally surrounded by water, so they don't know what water is. Our automatic tendency is to perceive the world as a collection of separate objects. Our attention doesn't usually include the space between those objects. Dickinson is referring to this space as banks of noon, as if it were a water body. And the butterflies are swimming plashlessly through these banks. If you think of butterflies swimming through banks of noon, rather than simply flying in space, if you think of a bird rowing through the ocean, rather than floating in nothingness, you begin to see each creature is actively moving through the world. Swimming and rowing are a bit more active verbs than flying or floating. And the bird is not just rowing, but dividing the ocean, the space around it, with its oars and its wings. By our very existence, we take up space in the world. We're rowing through the ocean or swimming through the banks of noon, even if there isn't a poet to observe us and write about us doing it. As with any Dickinson poem, this poem could mean so many things, so these are just my impressions, but I'd love to hear your interpretations too.